All right, happy engineer, you're in for a treat today. Welcome back. And Skye, thank you for making time to be on the podcast. I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. It's really good to be here.
Skye, I'm so excited to hear from you because engineering leaders who I work with as a coach, and so often it comes up that as an adult, we face these challenges in focus and productivity and getting more done. And a lot of times we're curious about, I wonder if I might have ADD or ADHD. And many of those leaders go on to be diagnosed as adults. And you've had that experience and are now one of the leading experts in helping people with strategies and tools to deal with that change, which for many of us is extremely confusing and hard to navigate in the workplace, especially in fields like
hmm
engineering. So maybe you could back up and tell us your story because you had a similar experience through your PhD years. So, what was that like pre diagnosis and the discovery and how you found out and what led you down this road?
Yeah. Well, I thought my life path was going to be academic. I've been a lifelong academic. I was one of those kids who wanted to get into law school, and so I was studying really hard even in high school, and then post high school I was doing a master's, a post grad degree. I kept being like, you know what? I might every time it got to the bit where you had to get a job, I was like, I'll just do another thing in university because I loved learning. But it also came with a lot of struggles. When I was undiagnosed, I was burning out all the time, like pretty
Mm.
much between every degree, or every certification. I was taking time off. I was making art, which is my other passion, and I was like going away and then I was coming back. And it got to the point where I finished my master's in sociology, which was a totally new area I hadn't studied before. And I worked two jobs. I taught in two different universities. And by the time I finished that master's, I was so burned out that even though I received a scholarship to do a PhD, I don't even really remember getting that. It was only
Mm.
later on, and I actually quit. I left university and I went and I worked in a bakery and I did some art for a whole year because I just couldn't handle it. So when I finally met my then boyfriend, now husband, and he was sort of like, "Wait, you have a scholarship? What are you doing with that?" Like, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess I should do something with that." Because I was so burned out, I hadn't even thought about it at the time. And so when I went back to university and I did decide to do a PhD, it was with the expectation that I needed to figure out what was going on. I wasn't going to be able to do 3 years of focus without understanding. And so I went to my university's Inclusive Learning Center. Shout out to them for being so wonderful.
Mm.
And I basically said, "Hey, what is wrong? What's going on?" Thought it might be dyslexia because I'd heard that might be in my family. And they said at the end, they're like, "We're not sure about the dyslexia, but we definitely think you have ADHD. You should get tested." And that was really the first time I heard about adult ADHD, despite teaching developmental psychology and teaching kids autism
Mm.
and things like that. It just wasn't discussed at the time, like the idea that adults could have this as well.
Wow. When you were going through or going into burnout,
hmm
you did describe a lot of things happening. It would be easy to simply say you did too much. You burned the candle on both ends. You were
hmm
working all these
hmm
jobs. Do you feel like that was the case, or was it this inability to focus or the challenges related to this that really led to the burnout? How would you describe that experience?
It's a good question. I think it's both because with ADHD, we have the impulsivity piece. And so taking on too much is almost a part of ADHD, or especially undiagnosed ADHD as well. But then the executive
Mm.
functioning is the fact that I was doing it all the hard way, I would say. So I was really strict at the time. I hadn't really figured out organizational systems for my brain. So I'd just taken all of the what I'm going to call neurotypical, which means just people who aren't neurodiverse systems, and I had built them out to work for me. But what that often meant was I was very, very rigid. I was creating something and being like, right, well, I just have to stick to this and I just have to not do anything different.
Just
And then
grind it out. Grit,
yeah, grind it
resilience,
out.
go.
And then,
Okay.
Monday would come around and things would happen. And I would be like trying as hard as I can to like stop everything from moving because, as I can talk about later, working memory struggles are difficult with ADHD. Time blindness is difficult with ADHD. So nothing had flexibility. And I think
Mm,
that was a big part of why I burned out.
mm. So you chose to get tested, and when
hmm
you received the diagnosis, what was that moment like? Was it a relief? Was it really scary? What were you going through at that point?
I think the initial, because the way the system works was the university couldn't verify my diagnosis. I had to go get that verified. So the initial conversation would, when they said, we think you have it, you should get tested. And to be fair to them, they did like eye tracking and all kinds of things. It was actually quite intense. Was sort of like, okay, finally I have a name for a thing. That was it. There
Mm,
was sort of a sense of, okay, that wasn't what I expected, but at least I know I have a name for something. That's something. And I was literally on Google, like, what is adult ADHD? How does it work? Because the thing that people don't really talk about is that when you get a diagnosis like this, it doesn't always come with solutions. It just
mm,
comes with the diagnosis. And so you can get a diagnosis of ADHD and they're a little bit better about it now. And obviously, if you're going to a psychiatrist, they'll talk medication. But it can be very much like, okay, so your brain is super different from the rest of the world. See you later. And you're often left kind of going, cool, okay, well, that helps me at least figure out what to Google. Like, but
yeah.
that's about it.
Yeah. Wow. Diagnosed, but no solutions. What'd you do right after that? You get the diagnosis. Like, tell us about the sort of
hmm
transformation that occurred for you personally. Did you find solutions quickly? Was it really hard to transition your life around this? You've now
Mm-mm.
gone on to immense amounts of research and discovery in that. But those first few weeks or months, what was that like?
Yeah, it's a good question because obviously as an academic, I couldn't help myself. I deep dived and did a
Yeah.
whole ton of research, and that's actually how I am sitting here today and talking to you. But initially I did just go on YouTube and just Google like, am I gonna be okay?
Yeah.
Like,
What now?
shout out to there's a great she did a lot of videos, how to ADHD, a lot of how-to videos, and I just binged watched all of them, which is a very common experience when you have ADHD. Your new hyperfocus is what is ADHD? And so I just watched all of them and I was trying to figure it out. Like, what is it? How does it work? Is it going to be okay? And there was a lot of fear a little bit there as well, because when someone gives you a diagnosis, there's a bit of a relief, like, okay, I know what this is, but there's also a fear because you've heard all kinds of things. And now a little bit more, there's a feeling of, okay, this has got strengths and weaknesses. But when I was doing it, which was a bit earlier than that, there was a lot of anxiety about, like, am I even going to be able to do what I want to do? Like at the time, I was still trying to be an academic. So that was
Mm,
a bit of an anxiety around, okay, what does it look like? And then you have to go back through everything you've ever done in your life and put it through that lens as well.
yeah. Would you be willing to maybe lay out the terms and maybe the
hmm
nerdy way to say it, the inference space of this? When you think about ADD, ADHD, what's under the umbrella of neurodivergence in
Yeah.
general? You hear about the spectrums of these versus
hmm
autism. Like, what all are we talking about? Just the engineer and me. I'd love to get some definitions
Yeah,
to
for
work
sure,
with
for
because I'm
sure.
certainly not an expert. So, what have you?
Yeah.
It's the simplest way to define some of these different
Yeah, yeah.
different diagnoses.
So I'll give you the diagnostic process. I think that's a helpful way to consider it. So,
Yeah.
neurodiversity is quite a broad term, and I think a lot of people just sort of adopt it in various ways. But essentially, the way that this is currently being diagnosed is using a book called the DSM. And the DSM is a diagnostic and statistical manual. I think they've got like 5+ is kind of where we're at right now. And it's something that is sometimes updated, but it's used by psychiatrists and other professionals as well to understand what people have. And so you'll have, autism spectrum in there, you'll have different kinds of learning difficulties in there, and you'll also have ADHD in there. And so for ADHD specifically, you've got this section where they'll ask you some questions. They make a few adjustments if you're adult versus a child. Sometimes they'll want additional things. I did like eye tracking tests as part of my initial understanding of what I had. Sometimes
Okay.
they're going to want to know from like childhood information, things like that. But essentially, what they're looking for is this problem of I feel restless, I interrupt a lot, I'm driven by motor, I feel easily distracted. They'll go through and they'll ask you those questions, and then they want to know, are these systems pervasive and persistent over time? So is this just that you're currently going through a really stressful moment, or is this a pervasive part of your life?
Hmm.
For me, it would be like, is this something that I did during my burnout period, or is this something I've done my whole career to this point?
Okay. Would you walk through some of those indicators if someone's wondering, like, would it be wise for me to go and be tested and
Mm-hmm.
see if I
Mm-hmm.
have this? What are the main things that somebody would be thinking or experiencing day to day, an engineer on the
Mm-hmm.
job? You
Yeah.
mentioned a few, but what are the big ones?
Generally speaking, if you are somebody who finds yourself persistently across different areas, work and home, you are impulsive, so you do things reactively, even though you don't mean to. If you find yourself really forgetting things, so, if somebody says, "Hey, can you get this to me tomorrow?" and you say, "Yeah, no worries, I'll definitely remember that," and you don't write it down, it's just gone if you're one of those people.
Mm.
If you struggle with time blindness, and I speak on the executive functioning stuff because I particularly support that. But if you struggle with time blindness, so you struggle to, if someone says, "Hey, when does that report due?" and you pick a number out of the air because you're not really sure, even though you've been doing this job for a while, those could all be really good indicators that you might have
Mm.
something worth getting checked for.
Time blindness. I've not really
Hmm.
heard that term before. So it's guessing in a sense versus knowing something that you were told in the past. Is that what that is? Or is it just a
Yeah.
lack of awareness of time passing? Like, wow, it's been 4 hours. I can't believe I've been sitting here for 4 hours. What, or is it both? What all is time blindness?
Yeah, that's what the researchers are trying to figure out. And it really blew my mind when I learned about this. That was a piece that I did not understand was part of
Mm,
ADHD at all. But essentially, what it is it is a lack of awareness of time passing. So you are correct in that. There are some researchers that think that maybe it's got to do with the fact that if you're ADHD, your internal clock is a little bit faster. So maybe that's what's going on. But
mm,
essentially, it's a combination of you're gonna likely underestimate how long something's going to take. So you could say, I'll get that to you by Friday, and everyone else is like, it should take a month, like that kind of thing. And this is particularly interesting if you're an engineer because you're doing a lot of things that involve time and
for
figuring
certain.
out time. If you're the kind of person where they say, oh, so and so's, I'll get it to you by the end of the day is the end of the week, and then the end of the week is the end of the month, then you're probably in this category. On the other side, it's also just how long do you think time is going in? You're the person who sort of goes, right, I need to be there in an hour, and then starts working, and then it's the hour. I often say people with ADHD, we love to think we can teleport. We're like, oh, I'll just be there, right after I have this other meeting.
Okay. What is the biggest challenge for you in interacting with, I'll call it, the people who are quote normal in their minds and they
Mm-hmm.
see the world
Mm-hmm.
a certain way, and then someone comes in who's ADHD and it has a completely different experience. What creates the challenge in those interactions with other people?
So what we're talking about is struggles with transition, or sometimes it's called set shifting. And there is a lot of
Okay.
research on this. It's this idea is a bleed effect, which basically means that if you are ADHD and you get pulled out of a meeting into another meeting, you have this a bleed effect between the two meetings where someone will ask you a question in the thing you're talking about, and you'll still kind of be half in the other thing. So the transition
Mm.
can be a struggle. And I will say ADHD has strengths and weaknesses. So one of the strengths is that hyperfocus. And people think of it as not a strength, but often it's to do with the fact that they struggle to get out of it or sometimes get into it. So if you have the strategies, which I actually do, you can DM me focus on Instagram at Unconventional Organization, and I'll just give you the document that shows you how to do that. But if you are in a position where you're kind of stepping into focus, once you're in focus, you can really go for it. Like that maker time
Yeah.
is awesome, right? But if you're in that meeting time and that maker time and it's all in the same week, and I'm saying this because I'm sure you guys have heard about meeting maker time, it's really, really hard to get anything done. And what people tend to do is they tend to move into a reactive mode and they're not actually able to get deep and get any traction.
Mm. Just the other day, I got a message from one of my past clients and a listener of the podcast. Shout out Alexa. She was listening to one of my previous episodes on productivity. We went through and talked about different strategies and pillars, the mindsets and the tool sets of being productive at work. And I'm actually going to read a question she sent me after the fact, because I think this is right in the heart of what you're describing. She said, Zach, really appreciate the episode of productivity, incredible content. But my question, have you thought about doing an episode on some of these pillars specifically for folks with ADHD? Maybe you have and I've missed it. Well, Alexa, you didn't miss it. We're doing it right now. My husband was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and his old tools that made him successful as a software developer aren't working anymore. The tools and approaches that work for me are just not for him, and in many ways feel ableist. I know there must be successful leaders in technology that have solved this. I'd love to hear you explore it. Keep up the great work. I think the heart of this is what lots of people face. It's like, okay, when I want to be productive and organize my calendar and switch tasks or switch focus, here's what I do and it works and I'm effective. And when I offer that to someone else who has ADHD, diagnosed or not, and especially when they're not diagnosed, it just gets frustrating for them because they don't understand why they can't do it the way I can do it. So, Skye, what are the two or three most important ways of working or tools that people need to focus on to lean into the strengths side of ADHD and to manage where it can be a weakness?
I teach a program called Focus Balance Days because we want to focus on days, because who remembers every other day or a couple of times a week when you have ADHD? And so what that really focuses, it's really a culmination of the research and work that I've done with my own clients. And so what we talk about is we talk about going from overwhelmed to focused, stuck to proactive, and then inconsistent to consistent. I would say there's 6 things that I really want to teach you, but the main 2 that I think people often use the most is how to prioritize. So we talk about a prioritization filter, because you're sort of in that overwhelmed space at the beginning of the day. You've got a million things coming at you, and then something more drops on your desk or in your inbox. And then the step into focus routine. How do we actually step into that focus when we have that maker time? How do we use it? How do we make sure we're not procrastinating everywhere? We're cleaning our office, we're organizing our papers, we're just checking that one more email and we're not actually doing the thing.
So, prioritization, what would be different that someone with ADHD needs to consider and how to prioritize versus how everybody else does?
One of the big things about it is working memory struggles. Working memory struggles means that it can be really, really hard when you have ADHD to like do the Eisenhower matrix in a traditional way, because you have to think about what's important and what's urgent. You're kind of keeping it all in your head and writing it down. The way I teach it is we do a prioritization filter. And what that does is the first thing we do is we brain dump everything. If you want to do this at home, you can imagine your brain is full of boxes and those boxes are tasks. And you take all of those boxes out, you write them all down. Family, home, I want to speak another language one day. Like you get everything down. This is probably the most anxiety inducing thing you'll ever do working with me, because you have all these things, but then we organize them. So we say, is there anything we can discard off the bat? You'd be surprised how many I need to send Christmas card tasks are still stuck there and you haven't, Christmas is over. And the other ones are like, could we catch and release something back? So it's like a soft version of delegate for people who struggle with delegation, and say, I was really excited about this project, but can you give me some more details? Maybe organize a meeting with me and then we'll discuss it. Really helpful if you're in a kind of engineering project-based role. And then from there, what you have left, you go through and you say, okay, with everything that's on my list, what needs to be done today, or there will be a significant negative external consequence. That doesn't include I'll feel bad. That doesn't include I said I would get it done by Friday, but no one really cares. That doesn't even include it's overdue, but really there's no deadline. What has a significant external negative consequence? Go ahead and write a T next to that. Then what needs to be done the next 7 days, or there'll be a significant negative external consequence. Write a seven next to that. Then everything that's left, everything that's left, have a look at those things and go, okay, what are the 1 to 3 things that are very ROI positive, that are going to move my
Hmm.
projects forward, move my life forward? Now you have more space in your week because most of the time people only have up to 5 T tasks and up to 10 7 tasks. And with the rest of the time in your week, block time for those important things like you would a doctor's appointment. Like however you block a doctor's appointment, block those times, focus on that time and get those things done. That's the process that we tend to
Yeah.
go to. I just basically gave it to you, so you're
No, I love it.
welcome.
How often do you do that? Like I think about the today tasks. One of
Mm-hmm.
the things engineering leaders face is the constant evolution of priorities.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
today this is clearly priority one, and you would think that it would be priority one tomorrow, but because the VP walked in my office and said I need this report by the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly it's not
Yep.
anymore.
Yep.
So how often do you do a process like this, and how do you handle those unexpected changes in priority?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I do is I go ahead and do it every morning. So that's what I would recommend. Do it every morning. You can actually do this whenever you feel slightly overwhelmed. The great thing about the system is it's very flexible. So if you take a few days off, you come back, it's not really going to bite
Yeah.
you. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
doesn't really affect you too much in a way that a really static system would. You can go ahead and do it in the morning is usually what I recommend when you work with my program. You do that as a daily standard. And just whenever you feel overwhelmed. But the key is you don't make an entirely new prioritization filter every day, but you add to it. You think of it like a tree, you add to it, you build on it, the roots grow, that kind of thing. So everything is connected. And so what a lot of people will do is they'll make a list, they'll organize it, they'll feel better, and then the next day they'll make an entirely new list. That's so much additional work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Really good distinction. So I'm just daily asking, is there anything new that's come to
Mm-hmm.
mind that I'm holding that I need to dump? Throw
Yep.
that down. And then a quick
Filter it
assessment.
in.
Did
Yeah,
any of those sevens change? What's the T's for today?
exactly.
And
Exactly.
get going. Yeah, I love that. Okay. What about this stepping into focus piece? And I think one of the most common challenges or complaints that I hear with the things that I coach folks in is, yeah, okay, we're going to block the time. You've got 2 hours set aside for focused
Mm-hmm.
deep work. Great job. We're going to protect that boundary. Great job. And some people sit down and have no problem going from 0 to 100, miles an hour on that
Mm-hmm.
priority. And other
Mm-hmm.
times we sit down and it's the whole 2 hours is gone and I did nothing.
Oh yeah.
What's the key
Mm-hmm.
to just being able to direct our focus to the highest
Yeah.
priority on command rather than
Yeah.
when I'm lucky enough that it
Yeah.
happens to go my way?
And the on command bit is really important because often a lot of people's struggles are actually around this. People will say, well, I feel like I can never control my time. I feel like once I'm
Yeah.
doing something, I and find myself doing it for 5 hours. Like a lot of this comes from the fact that you feel like you're being dragged around by the nose. You're not actually able to control your time. So this is often a huge unlock for people. But essentially, what I do, and this is based on like, I can go so nerdy on the research. I'll spare you guys, but just know that this is based on a lot of research. But the idea is that you're up here, you're in a high dopamine state. You're, on your phone, on the couch, you're talking to people, you're checking that email. That counts as a high dopamine state. And you're wanting to go into a lower dopamine state where you're focused, you're writing a report, you're deep thinking, all of those kinds of things. You're
Mm,
drawing things out. And there is a gap there between those. This is for everyone. There's a gap between the high dopamine and the low dopamine state. When you have ADHD, that gap feels awful. One of the things I like to do when I'm talking to new people who are joining me is ask them how that feels. And people have told me all kinds of things. Somebody said it feels like someone's eating your soul. Some people have said it feels like there's a wall coming down or there's an internal itchy, horrible feeling. So people really experience this
yeah.
super
Wow.
viscerally. When you understand that, it becomes very obvious why you might put it off and do something else. Our brains are
Totally.
really good at protecting us from things that feel
Totally.
bad. What I help people do is if you think about it as like steps, you've got, you're up here and you need to get to a lower step, but there's no steps in between. I
Mm-hmm.
help you add steps in between to help you step down into focus. And so those steps involve things like supporting your dopamine, giving you a little boost because we don't seem to get one when we start a task like neurotypicals, helping you with the working memory support, helping you go through that, helping you with transitioning, helping you with a bit of the fear of the blank page, a bit of
Mm-hmm.
tinkering, so that by the time you get to the bottom, it's almost harder to not start because you're already opened the application, you've already started, you've already, reduced
Yeah,
distractions, all of
yeah,
these things. Does that make sense?
yeah. Oh, that's really insightful, actually. And to your point that everyone goes through this, I relate to this
Mm-hmm.
feeling coming
Mm-hmm.
off of a podcast interview like this, for example. This is a really exciting conversation. I'm very
Mm-hmm.
energized, lots of preparation. There's a certain level of adrenaline involved, is just sort of being here and enjoying this.
Mm-hmm.
To go straight from this into some deep planning or prep work for an event we're having in March. Very
Mm-hmm.
difficult shift. I'll find
Yep.
myself leaving the office, walking around a bit, saying hi to some people in the other room, stalling, and I
Mm-hmm.
get into it,
Yep.
15 minutes later, time just kind of
Mm-hmm.
vanishes.
Mm-hmm.
To think about being more intentional through those steps makes a ton of sense. Where else do you see the biggest need in terms of adapting a normal work environment that we might face if we're at
Mm-hmm.
Google or we work at Apple and we're in the office, and the kinds of challenges where with just a few strategies we can become more effective? What are the others that you see come up with your
Yeah.
clients?
It's a good question. I mean, I was lucky enough a little while back to work with the New Zealand intelligence because they had so many people with ADHD. They reached out to me to figure out how
Okay.
to manage their managers. And so one of the things we saw in that environment was it's sometimes very simple things that people don't think about. So an example of that is having hard deadlines. So giving people hard deadlines rather than flexible. Sometimes when they find out people have ADHD, they say, "Oh, don't worry, like you don't have to do it." And you're actually removing a lot of dopamine and struggles with time blindness. Like the more things we can't put on the calendar, the harder it is to do anything. And then it's also the environment, creating a flexible environment, giving people options for working. Do people want to work in like a coffee shop or at home or at work? And just
Mm,
adjusting it based on the stimulation needs. Different tasks require different. And then the fun one I like to say, because people don't do it, and surprisingly often, is just being in a position where if someone's having a meeting, if there's a meeting room, putting a clock on the wall in this place where the speaker is so that if they are asked to give a 5-minute presentation, they can actually see how long 5 minutes is rather than having to guess.
mm. Oh, that's super interesting. Put a
Yeah.
clock on the wall. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
actually, as you mentioned that, I don't remember when I was at Whirlpool Corporation how many conference rooms had clocks on walls, but I don't think it was very many, if
Surprisingly,
any.
often they don't. Yeah, that's why I love to
Yeah.
do it because sometimes, especially when I don't do it as much anymore, but I used to work for the district health board. I worked for the intelligence service. And so there's always this fear of like, this person's coming in and we want them to be here, but they're going to make us change everything. And so I always started to put the clock on the wall because everyone's
That's
like, oh,
interesting.
I can do that one.
I know I'm going to get emails from my former colleagues with pictures of
hmm
clocks all over conference room walls because I'm probably wrong about that. But that's super
Yeah.
insightful. So make it easy and visual to see
hmm
the passing of time.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
brilliant. Okay. Well, Skye, I know you're deep in this research and it's become not just a personal passion for your own journey through life, but helping others. What are you really excited about in terms of the future? Is it just driving awareness? Is there new things coming that are helping people to
hmm
navigate this in different ways? What's on the horizon when it
Yeah.
comes to ADHD and neurodivergent?
Yeah. I love this question. I've never been asked this question, but I'm such a research nerd that I have like a person on my team who gives me new research to read. So, one of the things I'm really excited about is actually AI. And I know a lot of people are excited about AI. It's a big topic right now, but I'm particularly excited about it for two reasons. One is a lot of the supports seem to be really helping executive functioning. So working memory, time blindness. There's an app now called Goblin Tools that if you go and you write a task that you have to do into the app, it will break down that task for you and give you time estimates. Things like that are game changers for ADHD. But also, on another level, there's some research now into machine learning and diagnosis. So
Mm,
they are considering that they might be able to, based on speech, how people talk to each other, understand who might like a pre-diagnostic basically. So listening to people talk and then being able to say, okay, this person might need to be get tested because as the piece of research we read so well put it, rambling, going off on tangents, things like that.
sure.
So yes, that's
Interesting.
amazing. Amazing game changer if that's the case that they could do that.
Wow. I would imagine there's more than just diagnosing ADHD possible if you could actually analyze my speech patterns all the time. I mean, so many little things that are made
Yeah.
manifest through speaking. As a
Hmm.
coach, we both pay really close attention to what people
Oh
say
yeah.
because it's the clue to
Hmm.
what's really going on. Oh, I love that. So AI and its potential to solve these problems. Is there any specific AI tool you personally are using that helps you navigate life and research? And
Yeah. So I particularly work with business owners these days, but I'm actually thinking about doing a workshop on AI for ADHD because I think it is such a common struggle. I think the biggest ones for me that I'm using right now, I use Notion AI. I've recently started that just because they obviously have it's like a wiki for your brain, which if you
yeah.
have a working memory struggle with your brain is really helpful. I use Goblin tools to an extent. I more teach Goblin tools these days. I'm sort of working on starting to use Notebook LM because having something that can read
Hmm.
or make a podcast of information that I need to learn in the morning can be really helpful because I can do something, I can work out, I can do something active
Yeah.
while I'm learning.
Awesome. One other thing I'd really love to hear your heart around before we wrap, Skye.
Hmm.
You mentioned the sense of almost relief with knowing, okay, ADHD, I have a label now for this experience that I've been having. And now I
Hmm.
know what to go Google, and it kicked you off on a path that was ultimately positive for you. But I know from clients I've worked with that many of them, even if they are diagnosed as an adult, are hesitant to share that with others because it
Hmm.
feels like an excuse for why they cannot perform on the job.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
don't want to be, struck down. And even, me using the
Hmm.
word normal earlier as an example, it's like you create this
Hmm.
unintentional or maybe sometimes intentional bias against people like,
Hmm.
oh, so and so has ADHD. Maybe we shouldn't give them this task or shouldn't put them in
Yeah.
charge of this team. First of all, what would you maybe speak to that or help people
Hmm.
understand how to navigate society, but also personally in your own
Yeah.
mindset and how to deal with this in a positive way?
I will say, first of all, I have a lot of empathy for that. I didn't tell people that I was diagnosed immediately. I actually waited quite a long time to tell my professors. Even while I was learning about this stuff, I wasn't necessarily sharing it with everybody. So
Yeah,
I get it. It takes a while, especially some people, some people are friendly, some people are less friendly.
totally.
You don't
Totally.
necessarily want to tell everyone. But one of the things that I often recommend to my clients is that this is information about how you work. It doesn't have to be an information about your ADHD diagnosis. Because if I say to you, I have ADHD, and you only know about a 9-year old boy in your class that one time who was super
Yep.
distracting, then
Yep.
you hear the word ADHD, but you don't know what it means. So you're not even understanding it. So you're not even communicating what you're trying to communicate
Right.
by saying I have ADHD. So sometimes, particularly for people you might be concerned about, or if you're in a position where you want to get a promotion, it can be helpful to say, I work best in this environment. This is your goal. So understanding the goal of the business is to make X thing, launch this thing, whatever it is. And I work best in an environment where I have meeting time and make a time super separated so I can deep focus. That's how I work the best. I would like to do that. So you don't necessarily have to
Yeah.
disclose in order to get all of your supports. But at the same time, just know that ADHD comes with struggles, but also a lot of strengths. Creative thinking, creative problem solving, out of the box thinking. There's a lot of research behind that. So, this is very, very helpful as well in many ways.
Hmm. I love that. Bring it to specifically how you can best
Mm-hmm.
succeed in the
Yep.
workplace and talk about that. And to your
Mm-hmm.
point, the label is not helpful to someone who doesn't understand. And I was that for a long
Yes.
time and still in many ways feel like I've only scratched the tip of the
Mm-hmm.
iceberg. Today has been super
Yep.
informative for me to understand in a deeper way what's really going on. And for
Mm.
someone to tell their manager and that manager actually see the strengths in it, that's very rare. So you need
Yeah.
to be proactive yourself to share what you
Mm-hmm.
need to be effective, but also how you can be the best in these different
Yeah.
environments and leverage the
E-
strengths. That's awesome.
Exactly. Because sometimes people will come to me and they'll say, well, I told my boss I had ADHD, and then they were very supportive and they said, what do I need to help you? And I said, I have no idea. And they said, they have no idea. And now we're here. So, like,
Yeah.
sometimes that
Yeah.
happens too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a new name badge, but nothing happened. Amazing. Well, Skye, this has been really, really useful for me. I'm sure engineers who are listening will want to know more and may definitely want to plug into your resources around this. So, where can someone find you, connect with you? What's the best place to start in discovering
Yeah.
these tools and strategies from your
Yeah,
work?
so you can find me at unconventionalorganization.com. You can find me on Instagram at unconventionalorganization with an S. I also have a podcast, the ADHD Skills Lab, where you can find us. We interview a lot of very interesting people, and we also have research recaps. At the moment, I'm only working with business owners and some individuals, professional individuals who ask me really nicely, but definitely reach out and I will give you all of the resources.
Okay, amazing. I've seen some of the free stuff that you provide. It's tremendous. I definitely
Mm-hmm.
encourage you, happy engineer listening, go click the link in the show notes. If you are going to type in that URL that you heard, it's spelled the New Zealand way, so with an S. Make sure you get that in. And Skye, I really appreciate your generosity today. You know this from being a researcher. Engineers experience this as a coach. It's true that questions lead, the answers follow. And we're
Mm-hmm.
all looking for better answers, and specifically
Mm-hmm.
today, better answers for how to live with and thrive with adult ADHD. So, if we
Mm-hmm.
want better answers, we need to ask better questions. Skye,
Mm.
what's the question you would lead the happy engineer with today?
The question I would leave you with is a version of a question I ask, or a version of something I often say at the end of a podcast, which is, how much harder do you think you can work? Because often people will come to me and they'll say, I just need to white knuckle it. I just need to push through. And as somebody who's done
Mm.
that and burned out and come back, my question to you would be, are you working as hard as you can right now? Because you might actually just need different ways of working, not harder ways of working.
Mm. That strikes a chord of resonance. I relate to that myself as well. How much harder could you even work? Are you working
Hmm.
as hard as you can? Wow. Skye, thank you again for this. So amazing to chat with you and have a wonderful and happy new year 2025. For those
Thank
listening in
you.
the future, missed out on the Christmas tree in the background there. This has been awesome. And we'll have to do it again sometime, follow up and see. I'm sure the listeners will have more questions for you. We'll have to reconnect.
Definitely, it'd be fun.